sure the cat stays out of control during the show. He almost stepped on the self-destruct button yesterday. It was a disaster.
Okay, boss. Will do.
Yeah, cool. I'm gonna go get into character.
No, kitty.
Self-destruct sequence has been activated. Please prepare for a horribly painful death in 15 seconds.
What did I tell you about the cat? Can cancel
Lab will
self-destruct, please?
self-destruct in 10 seconds.
The red button.
Lab will self-destruct in 5,
Hang
4,
on.
3, 2. Self-destruct sequence has been cancelled. Thank you for using Acme Home Security Systems. Have a nice day.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show of Bandlab with your host, me the professor, and my new assistant, Igor. Yeah, it's the same Igor that almost blew up the lab earlier. Like I said, he's new, and he's a bird. So cut him some slack. Anyway, this episode we're going to be looking at creating beats. Previous episodes we've been working with a metronome, which does provide a basic beat for us to follow, but it's not particularly musical. And at the end of the day, once we've got our song structure pretty much figured out, we're going to want some drums, real drums. If we can't find a real drummer though, we're going to have to come up with a reasonable facsimile. So that's what we're going to do this episode, is find reasonable facsimiles to a real drummer. Starting with Bandlab's built-in drum machine. It's versatile, easy to use, and heck of a lot better sounding than metronome. So it's a good starting point to setting up a good beat to work with your song until you can get a drummer, or depending on your taste and the genre that you're working with, it may actually provide the beat that you need, no drummer needed. It really depends on your own particular preferences. But what if you don't want to use the drum machine? Alternative to that is using Bandlab's audio loop library. Whole mess of loops in there. A lot of these loops are percussion drum loops. We can use these in our song if we can find one that works. Sometimes having to sort through them all to find the right one can be time consuming, but you never know. There could be just some gems hidden there. So we're going to look at some of those drum loops, see if we can find some that we can use for our project. And last but not least, MIDI. MIDI is probably the most versatile option there is. We can create pretty much unlimited loops or beats using MIDI, but because it is so versatile, it's also a little bit more involved, more complicated. So we're just going to touch on it this episode, and we'll get into it in more depth in the later on episode. So to get started, let's go right into our mix editor. Here we are, and we are going to add a track just by clicking on the little add track button up here in the top left. And with a lot of other things in Bandlab, as I discussed last episode, there is a shortcut key, and the shortcut key is Shift-T. So once we have the new track window open, we're just going to click on drum machine here, and oh, look at that. What happened here? Okay, so we have a new track labeled drum machine, and there's some stuff in here. And what happened, if we click on this instrument button, bottom left, well, here's our drum machine. I'm just going to float this because it's being obstructed by my shameless plug from my Bandlab page. So here's our drum machine, and what our drum machine basically provides is a grid. The grid is 1 bar in length, 4 beats, and each one of those beats is subdivided into 4 subbeats. Each one of these rows represents a particular instrument or percussion instrument, and if we click on it, you'll hear what it sounds like. You can also press a keyboard key to preview it. You'll see the character to the right of the icon, so usually a number or a letter. For instance, if I press T, you'll hear the tom. If I press F, you'll hear the snare. S, you'll hear the kick drum, and so on. So you can preview what a particular instrument is. Different kits will have different instruments. Even if they have the same names, they're going to sound very different. If we click on that drop-down button there, we can not only preview it, but select an alternative. So if I want a hand clap there instead of whatever had been there originally, I have a hand clap available now. This is because a lot of drum kits have more instruments available than there are rows in our drum machine. So you can pick and choose. And To get us started, Bandlab actually provides 2 patterns to get us started, and these are the 2 patterns that were inserted into our project when we created the track. And if we listen to them, they really do not work with what we have there. So I'm just going to delete them, at least delete them from the project. We won't necessarily delete the pattern itself. We can either come in here now and edit the existing pattern to make it sound more suitable to what we're working with, or just create a new one. We do have 8 patterns available to work with. The remainder, C through H, are blank right now, so I'm just going to take one of the blank ones and I'm going to start filling stuff in. Before I do that though, I think I'm going to change drum kits. The 808 might be great for hip-hop and a few other styles of music, but not particularly for an acoustic blues bit. So you see we have a huge number of kits available to work with. I'm just going to come in here and, well, why not? Blues. So I'm going to start with a really basic beat, and the way we create a beat here, or a pattern, is just by clicking in one of these boxes. So you see this bottom row is a kick drum. I'm going to put a kick drum on beginning of beat 1 and the beginning of beat 3. And we can preview our pattern here to see what it sounds like. While I'm at it, I'm going to add some snare, I guess. That sounds pretty good. Maybe, what is that? That's a closed hi-hat. There we go, a little bit of closed hi-hat. That sounds pretty good. So if I want to add this to my project, I'm just going to come here, click C. It creates a 1-bar loop, which I can then stretch out as much as I want. And let's hear how this sounds. Okay. I accidentally added a crash there. We can get rid of it. Okay, so that works. It's a little bit boring, but it's more interesting than metronome. And we can embellish this. We can add some fills. We can, well, one of the things that you would typically do in a beat like this is probably have an 8th note groove on the hi-hat, where you would kind of play in between the beats as well. One of the things you're going to notice now, if I do that, doesn't really work. Why is that? Now, if you remember, I mentioned that this was a shuffle rhythm, this particular blues, even though it's notated in 4/4 time. In a shuffle rhythm, the 8th notes, the notes that fall in between the beats, don't fall exactly halfway between the beats. They're a little offset. And that's what kind of gives it that feel. If we listen to it without the drums, you'll hear that it's long, short, long, short, long, short. Whereas the drum beat itself, those hi-hat beats are very evenly spaced. Those are what are called straight 8ths as opposed to swung 8ths. So how do we fix this? Unfortunately, we can't. That's one of the limitations of the drum machine, is that we're kind of locked into this four-part subdivision per beat. For a shuffle rhythm, we would have to have 3 subdivisions, a triplet feel. So we can't really do that with the drum machine, unfortunately. We can try other options, but I think we're kind of stuck there. So that's one limitation, as I said, is that we can't really do subdivisions other than the 16th notes. The other limitation is that we're pretty much locked into 4 beats per measure, regardless of what time signature. If I went in here and decided to create a 5/4 song in 5/4 or some other offbeat signature, our drum machine would still only provide 4 beats per measure. It's a little bit limited. But as I had mentioned previously, the vast majority of popular songs are in 4/4 time. So for the most part, you're not going to find this too much of a limitation. The other limitation, well, it's a minor one, is that we are limited to 8 patterns. So if you have a song where the beat changes frequently, you have a lot of different beats in one song, you may run out of patterns. That's easy to correct just by adding a second drum machine to your project, and voila, you have 8 new patterns to work with. So that's a workaround. The other limitation, and this one there really is no workaround for, is that you can't adjust the volume of the individual drum beats. They're all going to be exactly the same volume all the time. When you couple that with the fact that every beat falls squarely on the grid, there's really no variation in rhythm at all, a drum machine tends to sound a little bit like a machine, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Again, depending on the genre you're working with, you may want a machine-like rhythm. But for something like this, blues, you may want something a little more organic, a little bit more human sounding, in which case that drum machine simply isn't going to work. So, what do we do if we can't use the drum machine? Our next option, I guess, would be to start looking into the loop library, and we are going to do that in just a few seconds. Okay, so we're just going to close things up here. Actually, I was thinking of deleting this drum machine track, but I will not. I'm just going to mute it. And I'm also going to point out something here. You see that you have the option here to export track as MIDI. Behind the scenes, the drum machine is actually using MIDI. It hides all the details from us, but if we download the contents of the track and bring it back up, you'll see that we actually have MIDI here. And it's being converted to audio. So this is what's happening behind the scenes, and we're going to keep hanging on to this for a little while because we may want to come back to it for demonstration purposes. But for now, what we're going to do is go into our loop library, and we're going to find that by clicking on this Bandlab Sounds button in the bottom right. And that brings up a whole mess of stuff. I had been in here earlier, which is why you saw the hi-hats come up earlier. But actually, let's start with the one-shots. One-shots are individual sounds. It could be a sound effect, a single drum hit, a chord played on an instrument, a single note played on an instrument, perhaps. And you could combine these in various ways to make more complex sounds. Loops are a little bit more complex already. They are probably a full-blown beat or possibly a chord progression, something a little bit more fancy than just a single note. And well, let's look at a couple of them. Let's look at bass. Just gonna click on one at random to preview it. So you see, it's an actual bass line, not just a single bass note. And we'd be able to drag this into our project and loop it all we want. Packs are a collection of one-shots and loops that complement each other. They're intended to work together. So you can create entire songs from one or more of these packs used in a creative way. For now, though, we're going to go to the loops, and we're going to limit our selection here. Basically, what we want are drums. Well, the genre here is kind of blues, rock. There is no blues. I'm going to go with rock metal. And you see, even if we narrow it down to genre, there's a lot of drums here. I'm not going to even try to preview them all because it would take way too long. So suffice it to say that I have listened to a lot of these drums, and I have a few that I like. These Steve Jackson drums are one of my favorites. They're real drums played by a real drummer, and what they provide is a lot of variations. You see, there's a lot of them. There's a few basic general purpose beats, but there's a lot of variations of each of these beats, so you can use them in a song to add variety. Rather than having one loop for the entire song. And I guess the easiest way to demonstrate this is to actually put them in. So I happen to preview them, and I know that from beginning from 27 here. And you see, if I drag the loop in, it will automatically create a track for me. And if we listen to this, I'm just going to solo it. I could have previewed it here. So now you hear this is a shuffle rhythm. If you listen to the hi-hat, it has that uneven beat, just like the guitar does. It works beautifully. Now, I could just loop this for the entire 6 verses or however much I want, but rather than do that, I'm just going to pull in a few other variations of this same beat and just merge them. So first thing I'm going to do, if you remember Snap to Grid, I like using Snap to Grid. It makes things clean and easy. And snap to grid, I'm going to turn on. And I'm going to set the grid size, why not, to 1 bar. So that was sample number 27. I happen to know that they're sequential, so sample 28 would be the next one. And if we play from here, see, it's essentially the same beat, except it starts with a crash. So I'm just going to, okay, that was 28, 29. I'm just going to throw them all in here rather than preview them one at a time. We'll just combine them all and run through them and get an idea of what they do. Now, as I said, in real life, I would not just take each one of these and randomly combine them. I would be a little bit more judicious. And because they're audio loops, you can stretch them, you can cut them up if you want. If you want to, say, keep only the crash or only a fill, you can do that. And I kind of lost track of where I am, like 32, 33, 34. I think this goes all the way up to 37. So that's 11 different variations of the same beat available for us to use, which is pretty cool. Okay, I think that does it. So let's take a listen. So there we go. We've got our beat. Real drums. We have a crash at the beginning of that. Otherwise, it's essentially the same beat as the first time. Crash again, slightly different sounding crash. And if you look at the waveform, you can see they even look different. Crash again. Oh, a little bit of a fill there. Different fill. There are also little variations in the volumes of the drums, how the hi-hat, sometimes the hi-hat's completely closed, sometimes partially open. So it's much more natural sounding. It really sounds like you have a real drummer playing along with you. So you notice this, now we've gotten to cross stick instead of playing as a regular snare. Okay, so those are the different variations of just this one beat. And naturally, you wouldn't really, and you know, these are all about 4 measures long. So typically you would use 2 of these in, say, an 8 measure verse. This is a 12-bar blues. We would use maybe 3 different ones, combine them in different ways, or stretch one out to 8 measures, or the full 12 if you want. So each verse could be slightly different from the other one. Add some variety and interest to the song. It's a great way to substitute for a real drummer. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. And yeah, this is really great. Now, before we wrap this up, I'm just going to pop back in here and look at the one-shots. These are Steve Jackson drums that I've been using, and I just happen to like these, but there's a lot of other options available. You just have to browse and see what you like yourself. But if we come in here and look at the one-shots, so for instance, kick, and same, I'm going to come to rock metal, you'll see that there are some Steve Jackson kick drums here as well. And if you play them, sample them, pretty loud. So you have all these different variations of a single kick drum. Excuse me. So you really have a lot of options here if you want to create a beat from scratch. I'm going to do a quick example here because this can get really involved. I'm going to set the grid size to 1/4, 1 beat. And I'm going to take, say, a hard kick, throw it in here. And now what I can do, if I zoom out a little bit, I'm going to trim this down so it's about 2 beats in length. And I'm going to copy it. If you remember, if I press the Alt key while dragging this, it'll create a copy for me. So I can just go, oops, I messed that up. Undo a couple of times, love undo. And so here's our kick drum every 2 beats. If we mute this, so there's our kick drum. And we can come back here, and if we wanted to, we could find a snare. And same thing, Steve Jackson, and we have, again, different, and one of the things with the different volumes, it's not that just the drums get louder with the louder hits, the tone of the drum changes. This is something you can't really simulate when using a virtual instrument, these nuances in tone. So you can really get a very realistic drum sound here. And we can do the same kind of thing. We could take a snare, just throw it in here somewhere, trim it down so it's about 2 beats in length. And we're going to copy that as well. For some reason we lost our snap to grid setting. So there's our grid. We're just, whoops, I forgot to press Alt. I pressed Control for some reason. I'm being very messy. I'm going to start again. There we go. All right, so we're going to copy that. And I did copy it. I stretched it. Now we're going to copy it. There we go. And so again, we can build up a beat hit by hit doing it this way. One of the things you'll notice is I have to create a track for each individual instrument. If I want to add a closed hi-hat, well, any hi-hat, I'd have to create a hi-hat track. I'd have to create tom track if I wanted to add toms. If I wanted a crash, I'd have to create a track for that. So basically, every instrument in the kit would need its own track. And you can see this can get pretty involved if I want to start adding fills or variations in the types of drums. But overall, it gives you a lot of versatility to create your own drum beats. Am I recording? I would typically not want to do this for an entire song, but there might be a break in the song where you want to add something that's just not available in the loop library, a really fancy fill or drum roll. Well, have at it. You can really go nuts this way. But essentially, these are your options when it comes to loops. You can use the entire loop or individual hits and create. And again, I can combine these. If you remember, we can select a whole bunch of stuff here, merge region, and now we have a nice little single loop that we can just stretch out as many times as we want. And we can do that with each one of our instruments if we wanted to. So these are our basic options, and that leaves us with MIDI. So we are going to get to MIDI as soon as I get this bird off of me. All right, so that leaves us with MIDI, and the easiest way to get started with MIDI is just to use this MIDI track that we created earlier. So if we take a look at this, we can double click on it or come down here and click on this MIDI editor button in the bottom left. I'm going to double click here and it comes up. This little window that opens is resizable. I had it open earlier and had resized it somewhat larger. We don't need it very big though, because you see most of the stuff is concentrated in a very small area. So what are we looking at here? We have a piano keyboard, which is odd because these are drums, right? It even says here on the track, General MIDI Percussion. And we have all these dots. Each one of these dots represents a musical note that's being played. And the keyboard tells us what note it is. So going horizontally here, we're talking about time. And vertically is pitch. And this will tell us where a particular note falls. So these notes fall on measure 1, beat 2, beat 3, beat 4, and so on. If we play this, Let me see if I have it soloed. I'm going to solo it. If we play it, it sounds like a drum beat. Not really as good as the beat we had with the drum machine though. If we solo this one, see, it sounds very different. And the reason for that is general MIDI is a sort of generic standard that all general MIDI instruments support. So it's very basic because it's the lowest common denominator. It sounds like drums, but it doesn't sound like very good drums. So in order to make it sound a little bit better, what we can do is go in here, click on the instrument button. So now you see what comes up. Now if you remember when we were looking at the drum machine, there were different keys that would play different instruments. And here you see these keys are actually mapped to a piano style keyboard. If I had a MIDI controller, I have a MIDI controller available. So you can see I can play it. You don't see it in the picture because it's out of view, but you can actually play these beats on a specialized controller or on your computer keyboard or using the mouse, obviously. But for now, we're not going to play them. We just want to replace them. And what we're going to do is come here. We see we have drum kits just like we had with the drum machine. And I'm going to come in here. And now we see something that looks drum-like and sounds drum-like. So this changes the representation. When we come back into the MIDI editor, now we're actually looking at drums. This is a little bit more like what we had with the drum machine. And now we see that we have our hi-hat hits, we have our snare, kick drum, and if we play this now, we still have it soloed. It sounds exactly like the drum machine sounded. Only now we have the flexibility of coming in and altering some of these notes. We can move them slightly behind or ahead of the beat if we want. We can change the volume of them so that some of the beats are louder than others. We can add slight variations to the beat here and there. So it gives us a lot of flexibility, but as I said, we're not going to delve into that too deeply in this episode because that can take us a lot of time. But we will continue our exploration to MIDI and what we can do with it. But I think that pretty much wraps up this tutorial for today. So we're just going to get back to the main screen and recap. Hey, so a quick recap. We used a Bandlab drum machine to create a basic drum beat, demonstrated how it works. Then we also went and found some beats in the Bandlab loop library that we were able to use for our project. And finally, we went through how the MIDI works in the most general way possible, where we're going to get into that in a little bit more detail in the next episode. So I think that covers it for this show. Hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you did.
Has been activated. Please prepare for a horribly
Igor,
in 15 seconds.
I told you to watch the cat. Igor,
Level
the red button.
self-destruct in 10 seconds.
Press the red button,
Level self-destruct
Igor.
in 5,
Please.
4,
Red
3,
button.
2, 1. Goodbye. And don't forget to like and subscribe.